Today I am going to make a new video, so please
Although Chinese civilization has had its long history of decline and renewal throughout millennia, only one period has been distinctly described as humiliating. Since ancient times, when would the capitulation of one nation against another not be reason for humiliation? The name itself, 百年过迟, is primarily associated with China's weakened state in relation to the imperial nations of not only Western Europe, but also America, Japan, and Russia. I was careful not to use the word foreign power, precisely because at that time, China was already directly ruled by a foreign power, and that was the Manchu people. The difference between the Manchus and the foreigners in question who would be doing the humiliating is that the Manchus were a known people. Same with the Mongols, they were on the map. Other so-called foreigners like Tatars, Hui, Xiongnu, and these dozens of other ethnic groups all reside in the historic domain of China or the periphery. All these kinds of foreign peoples and regions historically lay in the known world, also known as Tianxia, or everything under heaven. Despite the Tang explorer Zheng He having explored Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Horn of Africa, no long-term diplomacy or trade routes were established, nor the desire to learn about outside cultures, language, or history, nor the desire to draw more accurate maps. All of this owing to the sense that such an expedition only confirmed the state of irrelevance for whatever lay beyond the Chinese heartland. However, with the imperial expansion of the 19th century nations, it would become abundantly evident that Tianxia was much larger than they could have ever imagined. The Qing Emperor Qianlong would establish the nature of the relationship between the Western powers based on the long-held views at the time. During these first encounters with the British, Qianlong was highly dismissive of the British attempt at diplomacy or trade. In fact, the British envoy to Qianlong was humiliated when the envoy came to bring gifts to Qianlong's summer palace to speak on diplomacy. What was taking place there was that the tributary nations of the empire were coming to the palace to give tribute to the emperor. The emperor saw the British as a distant nation who came to provide tribute and saw them and their quirky gadgets as nothing more than novel amusements. Macartney felt humiliated, and from the very get-go, ignorance of language and culture on both sides stopped more meaningful exchanges from taking place between the two powers, ultimately leading to the British to get the Qing's attention by more forceful means. However, prior to resorting to more forceful means, at the time of Macartney's mission, the British feared and respected China. It was the darling of the European intellectuals of the 18th century, and according to Sun Yat-sen, the British were even cautious at one stage about occupying India, thinking that the powerful Chinese empire to the north will intervene. The perception of China as a backwater didn't really take root until the First Opium War, where the disparity between the nations only became visibly apparent when full kinetic conflict erupted. After the war, it became clear that China had underestimated the British and the British had overestimated China. It is roughly estimated that the conclusion of the First Opium War was the beginning of the century of humiliation, as once the surrender terms were agreed upon, the country would be beset by many disasters. The traditional Confucian intellectuals would have had a profound reckoning on their conscience. Qianlong's reign was considered a golden age of the Qing, but it would be his successors who would be completely unequipped in dealing with the imperialists, and generation by generation, the power of the Qing dwindled. The Confucian scholars owe their allegiance to the emperor, but one by one, as the outside world presses in, they realize that the emperor may in fact not possess the mandate of heaven. After all, can he really be the son of heaven when what he rules isn't the entirety of Tianxia but a small slice of a corner of the world, trapped amongst the myriad of advanced nations? And the slice he has, he isn't able to protect. The real kicker though is that the emperor isn't even a Han Chinese, but a foreign conqueror himself. So China is a slave to this foreign ruler who is in turn now the slave of other foreign rulers. This decline in the cult of the emperor all but killed Confucianism by the time of the Republic, marking the end of over 2,000 years of influence. Confucianism was the cultural staple that held society together, and at the core of it was the worship of the emperor. This transition is also aided by the fact that the intellectual class started to abandon traditional intellectual pursuits, such as studying for the imperial examinations, and instead pursuing foreign studies. The moral decay of the 19th century is attributed to the hollowing out of Chinese values at that time. Perhaps if the emperor wasn't a foreign ruler, the people would rally around him like the Japanese did around their emperor. But to be discovered as not being the god of the world and being a hated usurper greatly diminished the worship of the emperor. All of this could have been avoided had China been able to militarily defend itself in the First Opium War in 1839. The First Opium War was like a stress test to see how capable the Chinese forces would hold up against the battle-hardened, industrialized war machine of the British. When foreign emissaries and European intellectuals had come to learn of how weak China was, it instigated a shark frenzy amongst the leading nations. Such a thing was a vicious cycle. Every time China had been beaten in battle by one of the imperial powers, the offending nations would double down on their plundering efforts. When China again tries to pick itself up and fails once more, everyone would double down their efforts to squeeze every last drop from China. What made this an especially humiliating sequence is that all of the offending nations were very usually at war with each other. The English, the French, the Germans, the Americans, Russians, and the Japanese, on the contrary, all had shared agreements with each other, allowing the rights of one imperial nation to be shared by all imperial nations in China. Such an unfair policy allowed them to selectively carve up China without getting in each other's way. They would even cooperate with each other on occasion to gang up on China, even though just one of the imperial nations alone could defeat China. To not have a single ally in the world, but instead to be feasted on by all the most powerful nations in the world must have been very demoralizing. Stereotypes of racial inferiority became an increasingly prevalent attitude at home, but even abroad, with Chinese immigrants regularly being the subjects of discrimination. Military conquest was actually not the way China was subjugated, however. The nature of the warfare between the Western nations and China was primarily economic. Japan and Russia were interested in land conquest, but the British and the Americans were interested in trade monopolies, customs fees, tax revenue, loan sharking, and selling drugs. The Anglo powers to this day have had a penchant for finely tuned economic warfare, winning wars without firing a single bullet, whilst draining the target nation of all their resources. Like what the British did in India or what America did in Guatemala, China had no defense for this kind of economic terrorism. Best known of which was the Opium War, where the British fought for the right to sell opium in China. The economic effect of the Opium War was a net outflow of 1.5 trillion Haiquan silver taels per year. In exchange for depleting the nation's silver, all they got was useless drugs that sped up the moral decay of an already demoralized citizenry. Quote Sun Yat-sen. Let us consider the different items together. First, we lose 500 billion every year from excessive imports. Secondly, foreign banks take away each year about 1 trillion from the issuance of banknotes, conduct of exchange, and deposits. Thirdly, our losses through the foreign monopoly of transportation facilities amount to about 100 billion. Fourthly, taxes, land rent, and the increment of land value in the concessions and ceded territories inflict on us a loss of nearly 500 billion. Fifthly, special business in China takes away from us at least 100 billion. Lastly, foreign speculators make an annual profit in China of tens of millions." End quote. The cost of reparations was also ridiculous. Every time China lost a war to defend its sovereignty, they'd be forced to compensate the victors, ultimately funding their own destruction. For instance, the Chinese continue to pay reparations for the Boxer Rebellion from 1901 to 1939. They paid today's equivalent of 61 billion US dollars over a period of 38 years, even despite going through major regime change. The icing to the cake of all this plunder is that at the accepted end date of the century of humiliation, 1949, when the communists ousted the nationalists fled to Taiwan with all the available wealth of the treasury, 150 tons of gold's worth, and priceless historical artifacts. Even if the economic situation was salvageable, how do you manage your military resources to defend yourself against this? The industrialized revolution made the world appear dramatically smaller. Where before China's geography allowed it to lay in isolation, the combustion engine allowed for large distances to be bridged, never before thought possible. The opening of the sea as an exposed front as a historically land-based power put them in a position of insurmountable weakness, owing to them having no geographic barriers between them and the rest of the world. What was once a barrier was now a portal. China's great rivers compounded this weakness further as foreign navies could penetrate into the heartland of China using its many rivers. It was the same for the Central Asian steppe, which was a wilderness to all but the most rugged steppe people. Now a Russian could get on a train in Moscow and be in Vladivostok in 3 weeks. The interests of imperial powers could now bring them right to the border of China to ply their trade. China now shared a border with the most powerful nations on earth. The Portuguese in Macau, the British in Hong Kong, Kowloon, India and Burma, the French in Vietnam, the Russians in Manchuria in Xinjiang, and the Japanese also in Manchuria. And a bit of distance away there's also the American presence in the Philippines. To suddenly be surrounded and at the mercy of all the world's greatest powers at once would have felt like an insurmountable disadvantage. So how did the century of humiliation end? Well, as I alluded to, this is a period called the Century of Humiliation. A century of plunder may seem like a more fitting title because that's what happened. But the usage of the word humiliation is very specific to a mind state, and according to Sun Yat-sen, it's the loss of national spirit. And his call to nationalism is about reaffirming their right to exist. Quote, "The spirit of nationalism is the most precious thing in the development of a nation and in the struggle for existence on the part of the race," end quote. The struggle to undo the humiliation faced by China required the kindling of a national spirit. Such a national spirit had prior been drowned out from hundreds of years of foreign rule and the loss of their most deeply held values. Sun Yat-sen took great inspiration from the success of Japan, who were also forced by circumstance to reform their whole culture. Being seen throughout history as a barbarian backwater, the rise of Japan was shocking but also a great source of inspiration for the new Chinese intellectuals. They generally viewed Japan favorably as a model of success and proved once and for all that Asian people are not inferior to white people. This may seem obvious now, but until the Japanese industrialized their society, non-white people all over the world were considered inferior to whites, and the Japanese massive success was like the breaking of the 4-minute mile. When one person broke the record, many people were inspired and started breaking the record as well. So China watching Japan overcome all odds gave hope that China could do the same, quote Sun Yat-sen in the 3 Principles of the People. The rise of Japan has broken down the traditional belief on the part of the white people that only white nations can be strong and progressive. It used to be the general belief that the Asiatics could not do what the Europeans could do. Because the Japanese have learned so well from Europe, and because we know we Chinese can do as well as the Japanese, we see the possibility of doing as well as the Europeans." End quote. Unlike Japan though, a sense of national identity was still in its seedling phase. As they were ruled by a foreign dynasty, Han Chinese nationalism simply didn't exist with the exception of the secret societies. For the most part, there was no strong sense of being Chinese, as prior to contact with people of the outside world, there were no Chinese people, there were just people. And these people were more aligned to their clan, if anything. Quote, "In the past, Chinese have emphasized the family relationship and kinship, and as a result, we have only the doctrine of the family group and the doctrine of the clan group, but no such doctrine as that of the national group or nationalism," end quote. With Confucianism pulling out the rug from Chinese culture after dictating the values of society for 2,000 years, China was now without a national sense of destiny, purpose, or identity. This is recognized by Sun Yat-sen, who knew that without a unifying ideology, the people would be aimless and could eventually become doomed like the Mesoamericans who were unable to adapt to change. The values of nationalism would slowly permeate over the course of the Qing dynasty, first through the Ming loyalist networks in hiding, followed by the Hongmen secret societies, then the mystery schools. Then throughout the many rebellions of the 19th century, nationalist sentiment started to become more widespread. The Taiping Rebellion, for example, was very much a war of ethnic cleansing against the Qing, who they thought were demons from hell. However, it was the foreign-educated Chinese intellectuals that would be the ones to popularize the notion of nationalism, and chief amongst these intellectuals is of course Sun Yat-sen, whose claim to fame is being the father of the nation, or as I think of him as, the architect of China's new post-Confucian identity. Instead of kowtowing in the direction of the emperor, you now salute a flag. His 3 principles, which were nationalism, democracy, and welfare, would become the foundation of the Kuomintang government and championed by the communists. Although nationalism as an ideology is often considered the enemy of socialist movements, Sun Yat-sen's style of nationalism is embraced by the communists as they see the contribution to Chinese national identity as integral to the rejuvenation of national spirit and reclaim sense of dignity. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you're interested in supporting the channel, check out the link in the description below to sign up with ExpressVPN to get unrestricted access to the internet wherever you are in the world. And if you like this kind of content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.